I've been doing a lot of interviewing lately. I think it comes with age. Having been in it for so long, people want some sort of a record of what I've been doing. And as I was working on that, I thought, I think it's time to do a serious revision of my artist talk, which is something that I think every artist has in their hip pocket and ready to present. And so I decided to take a hard look at everything that I've done from beginning to end. And I was looking at maybe 700 paintings and about 200 prints and about 100 performances, which is a side of my career that it seems very few people know about. But I'm going to show you some images from some of my performances this afternoon. And after reviewing all of this work, I reduced down to 3 issues that I thought I wanted to focus on, which would mean eliminating a lot of work, granted. But these were the 3 things that I seem to return to after working for over 40 years. And those 3 things are, number 1, the World War II incarceration. The second thing is called Yellow Terror, which are investigations into stereotypes, mainly from World War II, that were directed towards the Japanese people, the Japanese enemy, but it's really the Japanese Americans that have suffered for them, because most of the Japanese didn't even see these stereotypes or these depictions of them. And well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. And then the third thing is the most current work, which is called An American Knockoff, which is, I think, describes a lot of times how a lot of Asians in this country feel about themselves, that they're not quite full-fledged citizens of this country, and of course World War II demonstrated that. What I'm going to do is talk about those 3 things, and we'll go from there. And if we have time, we'll ask some questions. This is a Lawrence Estate auction. The reason I'm showing this is in 1969, when I first moved to Lawrence, I was married at the time, and my wife and I just come out of graduate school, and we had nothing in the way of household goods, household items. So fortunately, Lawrence was known as sort of the center of estate auctions, and I started attending these 2 or 3 times a week, and not only buying the household necessities, but having been a long-time collector, I couldn't resist buying mainly antique toys. And I'd always been drawn to this. Well, first of all, to back up a little bit, I've collected since the time I was a child, from the time we used to collect bottle caps, and we used to scrape off the brands off of the caps, scrape it on the sidewalk, and then pop the cork out. And then we put the cap, the cork behind the shirt and push it back in. We wear them like badges. And we try to fill up both sides of our jacket that way. And then we started collecting, without scraping the brands off, so that we'd have to go to the store and drink some kind of soda pop. We really weren't interested in drinking just to get the cap, which is really sort of, I think, the spirit of collecting. And so that was when I first started collecting. And then I went through all the things that most kids do, collecting bubblegum cards and the favorite baseball players, and all the way through junior high, high school, when I was collecting Field and String magazines, Outdoor Life, things like that. And then in college, when I started collecting jazz albums, which turned into a big CD collection. I could go on. But when I got to Kansas, I was finally salaried for the first time. And so I kind of stepped up what I was, the quality of what I was collecting. And antique toys, tin wind-up toys specifically, and 1930s Disney memorabilia. Just sort of walking around the house now, there are these little pockets of collections. Upper left-hand corner are salt and pepper shaker collections. And these things start by usually someone giving you one for a birthday or something, and they're just kind of neat items to have. And if you have that DNA inherited like I do, two is better. And that's how that shoe collection in the lower right-hand corner started. The lower shelf there are Japanese geta, and then hats. These are all salt and pepper shakers. Top or next to top shelf are salesman samples from Stetson hats. The shoes up above were premiums back in the late 40s, and if you went to a shoe store and wanted to buy your friend a pair of shoes, you would pay for it. They would give you a pair of these plastic shoes. And you wrap that up and gave it to the person, and they would know that they could redeem that for or towards a new pair of shoes. But that was a case where a friend of mine in Seattle gave me one for my birthday, and within days I saw another one at an antique mall, and so I had to have that. The rest is history. I think I have every one left in the world. So, there has to be a level of visuals or appreciation. I mean, I would never buy anything that was ugly, And as I say that, some of you are nodding your heads, right? On the left, right next to the toilet in the studio, sits this woman with my collection of Mao pins. I'm told it's quite intimidating using the bathroom because you sense its presence right next to you. She's not sitting on a toilet, she's actually sitting, I think, on a stool. Chalkware figurines, some of you might remember these from the 40s. Prizes for, throwing the ping pong ball and the fish bowl. I mean, these things back then were virtually valueless, and now it's easy to pay $150 for certain ones. And condition is everything as well. These are some of the toys, some of the collection. I had almost 2,000 pieces of my collection when I sold it. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner, those are all variations on the same toy, so you can see how that would impact collecting. People that were manufacturers knew what it took to get a collector excited, and so they would keep cranking these out. Even these bisque Mickey Mouses, which at the time I was collecting these were selling for about $2.50, are now about $250 a piece. And all they would have to do is put something different in Mickey's hand, to excite a collector. So that's just a small taste of my antique toy, tin toy, wind-up toy collection, which preoccupied me for the first few years after I got to Lawrence. And people have asked if having these things around started affecting what I was doing in the studio. And this was done the first year that I was in Lawrence, the Big Bad Wolf Eats in the Student Union, which was just kind of fantasy realized by if you shave the black off of Mickey's head, what was under there. And another painting, this was really more about the Coke machine, which was too big to fit into our house because there was so much other stuff in there. So we left it on the front signature sign. You can always tell people where you live, just look for the Coke machine. As far as the Jesus walking in front of it, that was a sheer afterthought. The painting existed without him for a long time. And then when I decided it just seemed right for some reason. I think maybe this is a case where the painting followed the title. The title I really like. So, but it was at this auction that everything changed for me. And there was a farmer, much like this fellow you see on the right in the red hat, was standing next to me at an auction. I was there with a colleague of mine, Michael Ott, because we went to auctions together a lot. And this fellow, this farmer, I could feel him standing close to me and sort of nudging me and trying to overhear what Mike and I were talking about. And I kept moving away because it was real annoying. And finally, during a break in the auction, he said, "Excuse me." And I looked at him and he said, "I was overhearing you speak the language, and I was wondering how you came to speaking it so well. Where are you from?" And I said, "Seattle." And he said, "No, where are your parents from?" I said, "Well, my father was born in Seattle. My mother was born in Idaho." You know, I knew what he was after, you know, because I've heard this so many times. And then finally he said, "Are you Indian?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'm Japanese American." And he said, he broke out and got real excited and he said, "Well, konnichiwa." He said, "The little lady and I, his wife, were in Japan in the 50s, and he said, we used to collect pictures, as he said, pictures of them Gishi girls. And he said, do you make pictures like that?" And I had enough of the conversation at that point and excused myself, moved away. And, but, you know, I thought about that because it was a conversation that I already had, well, first of all my life, but probably 5 times in the short period that I've been in Lawrence. So it was the first time that I decided that I was going to do something with my art to respond to that. And so I stopped in at the student union that following weekend. I picked up a book called The Coloring Book of Japan. And it was filled with simple line drawings of ukiyo and woodblock prints of geishas and samurai. And so I took that to my studio and I put together this painting and called it an Oriental Masterpiece. The only reference in their brick wall was sort of a Western culture reference, but you don't see that kind of brick wall in Japan. But the figure was Utamaro, the demon was Sotatsu, the wave, the famous Hokusai wave, and so on. And so, you know, I thought I'd do this one painting, and I put it in an exhibit that I had in Seattle along with the Big Bad Wolf and the Cold Freak, and I had a Buck Rogers paint, some other ones. And only one of these, which I felt, you know, stylistically still fit those other paintings. And what was interesting is that a lot of people talked to me about this painting, and they said, you know, it's good to see painting like that. You know, and I said, well, why? And they said, because you look like that. And that was a real sort of aha moment for me, because I felt like I had painted something really foreign. And because I didn't have these things around me when I was growing up. It was probably a lot to do with the incarceration during World War II. We got punished for looking too Japanese. And so, you know, I think my mom and dad made a concerted effort not to have Japanese dolls around or, you know, things like this. So as a result, all things Japanese look strange to me, exotic. So I decided I would investigate this idea further, and I ended up doing over 100 of these paintings. They're all 5 by 5 feet acrylic paintings. And just numbering them, numbering them, Oriental Masterpiece number 24, 25, and so on. And even the title carried a certain message to it, too, as you know, Oriental So, going into the first of the three series of work I want to talk about, the concentration camps. There were 10 of them during World War II that involved incarcerating over 120,000 Japanese Americans within 10 camps located along the western sector of the U.S. As far the triangles are the ones that notate where the main camps were. As far east as Rower and Jerome in Arkansas. And then the rest of them are sort of holding units that people that were suspicious, according to the government, were held for the duration of the war, but they weren't called the internment camps. And I should add, too, that the 120,000 that were incarcerated comprised over 95% of all the Japanese Americans living in this country. They all were living up and down that so-called security zone to the left of that jagged line. They were in such a rush to get us into the camps that they had to get us out of Seattle, in our family's case, and put us in some sort of holding area called an assembly center. And so we were sent to the Puyallup Fairgrounds, where they had the state fairgrounds. That's the lower picture. And we lived in horse stables. You know, they just scooped out the manure, and then they built floors right over the ground. And so there was that constant odor of manure coming through the floor. We lived in horse stables and quickly built living quarters underneath the grandstands where they had the rodeos. Up above are two shots of Minidoka, which was being built at the time. Minidoka would hold approximately 10,000 people. And you can see, what I remember most had to do with the extremes in weather, and you can see why. That's my mother, father, and myself. And I have to talk about my grandmother because she was so important in telling the story. She was born in 1888 in Japan and attended nursing school, Red Cross, did the Red Cross, and was sent to the Russian-Japan War as a Red Cross nurse. And then in 1912, a marriage was arranged with my grandfather, who had come to this country in 1906. So she was a photo bride. And she got on the boat in 1912 and started to keep notes, which turned into a diary that she was to maintain for the next 56 years of her life in this country. This is a sample of what it looked like. Written in Japanese, and for the last 14 years of her life, I used to give her a diary for Christmas. So it was kind of poetic that I should end up with all these diaries after she passed away, which I just recently donated to the American History Museum of the Smithsonian. In the camp series is the Minidoka series, the first one, which was done in 1976. And this particular series, there were 6 large paintings. They're a little smaller than what you see here. And I covered six aspects of the incarceration. This one had to do with my grandmother that kept the diary in camp. And in the upper right-hand corner is my mother and me. And if you look through those cloud formations, you can see the guard tower and barbed wire. My ex-wife and I had a big argument about this because she felt by keeping it in this woodblock style that I was perpetuating the stereotype that Japanese Americans go home and they put on kimono and eat with chopsticks. not the case. But I felt that, this was a time when no one was doing work like this, political work, and I was afraid that I could never get these seen anywhere if all my dealers felt that way about it. And indeed, the first time I showed these in Denver, my dealer wrote me this long letter, almost throwing me out of the gallery, saying, these might be important history, moments in history, but can't sell these. And you couldn't. It was tough, although things have changed. This is another one called The Exodus, the move to the camps. That's me hanging on to my father at the bottom center. And there were overlap. There were things in this painting that were in another painting, just showing you, I think, two of them. And then in 1980, I brought the diaries home and started having them translated and started the diary series, the first diary series, still keeping them in this ukiyo-e woodblock style. Except I started painting, I was collecting Art Deco radios. And so I started painting the radios. And there were, I think, 5 versions of this Pearl Harbor Day painting, 7/7. And so I gave you an opportunity to paint 5 different versions with a different radio in each one. And I started becoming interested in performance in the mid-'80s. And the first piece I did was actually one of the most major pieces I did, called the 7 Kabuki Plays. And each play, each act is one of the diary entries and one of the diary paintings. It goes through the composition of the diary paintings. So you can see Grandma here at the moment she's listening to President Roosevelt give his Years of Infamy speech. That moment is also captured in the painting in front of that radio. And then when Roosevelt starts speaking, his voice becomes very distorted with a lot of static. And Superman, which represents America, rises up in the background 36 feet in the air. And the figures in black with the spotlights are called Kurogo in Kabuki theater. And they would spin their lights around for dramatic effect, and they were waving the cape around, so it looked like Superman was actually flying. And so each act, as I said, it was inspired from a painting and became an act in the Kabuki plays. This was the Christmas Day entry when Grandma said, at 9 p.m., Santa Claus appeared, and we all forgot where we were. And this was that moment in performance that was represented by the painting you just saw. In this case, Santa Claus goes through the barbed wire into the audience, passing out origami cranes that were made out of Walt Disney wrapping paper. This was another painting prior to Pearl Harbor, when my grandmother mentioned how things were so calm, however she was concerned about rising world tensions, especially in Japan. Okay, this was another venture into Grandma's diaries. At this time, they were taken out of that woodblock style, and these became like snapshots of Kent. These are very small pages. They're only 11 by 14. And I did, I think, 35 of them from the same diary entries that I had before. This was when Grandma said it was the first day she saw what camp looked like, and she said, "I can't believe we're expected to live here for an undetermined period of time." Here she said, "Today I did laundry and cleaning. This is such a boring place to live." All along while I was painting, I was also doing lithography. This is a series of 12 variations called Yellow Nose Saying, which referred to the fact that in World War II they put the wrong people behind barbed wire. So you see the Japanese American behind barbed wire and the sort of prototypical Japanese, frequently a kabuki performer outside the barbed wire fence. This was a series commissioned by my dealer in New York, who asked all of our artists in the gallery to try to remember the first 10 memories of life. And Bernice Steinbach was the gallery director, and she knew that, I think there were 16 of us in the gallery at the time, knew that each of us had a rather non-conventional beginning to life. And her idea was to get this published in a book, but the problem is that it coincided with the book market, children's book market crashing. And so there were 3 of us that survived that, and they wanted to do books of the 3 of us, and then it became just 1, and that was me. And Bernice came up and asked if I would stand in solidarity that I would not get just mine done, it would have to be all 3. And then appearing on the books, which I think is Walt Disney backed up under those conditions. So these only became published as an artist's book. Mistaken identities, which had to do with the wrong people leaving camp again. All the people in camp are wearing kimonos, which certainly was not the case. These are limited edition artist books. And then this is the last series of work that I did on the incarceration experience. And this is still touring the country. The next exhibition, the big ship right now, is going to be in your own backyard at Ithaca at Cornell University, Johnson Museum. This, whenever I think this has had about 13 or 14 exhibitions, and whenever it's shown, there's always one painting called An American Infamy, and that painting has always seemed to sell at the exhibition. This is the 5th version. It's a view from the guard towers looking down, and you can see the machine guns that are pointed in, despite the fact that the U.S. government at the time said that they were pointed out to protect the Japanese Americans, you know, to keep the raging Caucasian population away from the Japanese Americans. But the fact was that the machine guns were all pointed inward. So this painting is it's about 7 by 9 feet. It's a triptych panel. This is called Night Watch, kind of a voyeuristic view. That's me riding a tricycle between the barracks. I've done about 6 variations of this particular theme. And it's a lithograph that's going to be coming out in a couple of months. A couple of other examples of this kind of scroll format that I've used before. The idea on the left was to sort of juxtapose the extremes of life in camp to the guard tower outside. And on the right, a totally fabricated situation of myself at the age that I was at, painting targeted barracks. One of my favorite paintings of the show, Shadow of the Enemy. This is a lithograph, very similar to the very first painting that you saw. This is one of the performances I did on the subject of camp. A flamenco dancer became available in Lawrence, where I live, and she asked if I would write a performance for her. As an entry to the dance department at KU. So I wrote this piece called Carta, which means the letter. And they wrote a letter to their living relatives in Japan outlining everything they accomplished in this country. And then before they mailed the letter, they recorded it on a tape recorder, one of the very, very first tape recorders that came out. And so I used that recording, that contained my actual grandmother's voice. I used that in performances. I played it during intermission. It was quite haunting, especially if you're speaking in Japanese. So here she's writing that letter, and she's telling the relatives about being put in these concentration camps. And just then, the Kurogo, her figure, the movie figure in black, pushes this guard tower across the stage. Polly Ray Ruiz is the flying band. This is another performance called Amnesia that was just performed twice in Seattle. Carrie Paladin was a singer that had been in my performances since the time she was 5 years old. And at the time she was just so excited to be in the performances. And then I started paying, $50 to be in the performance, which was got everybody excited. And then people started, when it started gaining some notoriety, wanted about 250 to 500. Well, a few years went by since I had done my last performance, and I needed an opera singer. And I remember Carrie studied singing, and I got a hold of her in DC where she was living, and I said, Carrie, I'm going to do a performance. She got all excited, screaming, and I said, would you sing the aria to Madame Butterfly? She got all excited because she's about 5'10", 5'11", and that role is for a very, very tiny Japanese woman. And she said, I'd love to. And I said, what would you charge for this? And she said, well, I'm a member of the New York Opera Company. And I thought, oh my God, and ding, 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 union, And so I said, well, what would you charge? She says, well, it would be $5,000 a song. And I said, look, for old time's sake, and so finally she agreed to come, and then she said, I don't fly. And I said, oh, God, so you've got to take a train clear across the country? She said, yes. And it takes 7 days, and, 83 times a day, and then there's a return trip. And so I agreed to that as well. So you could see why this was the last performance that I did, because it ended up costing me $21,000 to do this for 2 nights. So this is the point where she's singing Don't Fence Me In, which is a very popular song that for a while was actually outlawed in camp. And there was video, slides, and so on going on in the background. This is Keiko Kira, who was in most of my performances, and a koto player, a Caucasian koto player that she's very accomplished on the koto, and she was playing Don't Fence Me In here. And a video that I shot of the railroad tracks that actually took us to the camps in Idaho. And then this was the last painting of that series called Nikkei Story. First generation left panel, second generation Nisei, and third generation. And it tells just about everything I have to say about those 3 generations, from stereotypes to historical facts, relatives, grandparents. My dad was a pharmacist. On the right panel, that's me. I was in the first cab division. So I, for sake of time, won't go into details on this. But this painting is 8 by 12 feet. And it's in the Japanese Community Cultural Center in Seattle. Okay, the stereotype was the second area I wanted to talk about. This had to do, this particular picture came out in the 1990s during the US auto crisis in Detroit. And I wish I had the clipping that was in the Seattle, or in the Kansas City Star, because it was a Toyota that was being, it was a Japanese Zero fighter plane being piloted by slant-eyed, buck-teeth Jap pilot bombing Kansas City with Toyotas and Hondas. But this came from the same period of time. I just picked this up on the internet. And it was, here are these stereotypes that come back to, once again, haunt us. I collected stereotypes. This is my Halloween mask. And I had about twice as many. I donated this entire collection to the Wing Luke Asian Museum in Seattle. This was my salt and pepper shaker of Japanese and Chinese salt and pepper. Interestingly, they're all made in Japan. It's a sample of a lot of the hate postcards that came out at the time. I mean, there were so many that they refined them. They had variations on a theme. These are called patriotics on the left, pre-printed images, so you can send your letter to your family member and these envelopes. And Jap hunting licenses that were, I had over 100 variations, all two alike. And I did this painting that compared my colleague, Norman G., who's Chinese American, also taught painting at KU, and myself. And Yellow Rat Bastard, some of you may know, is the name of a men's clothing store in New York City that still exists on Broadway. And Yellow Rat Bastard is a racist term that came out of World War II. And interestingly enough, if you go to that store, it's filled with Japanese tourists. And they're buying these t-shirts that say Yellow Rat Bastard written in Japanese, And that shows you how immune a lot of Japanese people are to the history of these images that Japanese Americans were paid for. What are you pointing at, Sharon? Sharon? Oh, yeah. So behind each of us, Norman and I, are everything from stereotypes to family members. For example, Norman is married to a woman that's actually Japanese American, and these things, so their kids are half Chinese, half Japanese. I'm divorced. My first wife was 100% Japanese blood, and so my 3 kids are Japanese. But my son is married to a Filipino American. My youngest son is married to a Caucasian, although that happened after this painting. But ultimately, the only way you can tell the difference between Chinese and Japanese, look at the chopsticks. Chinese have longer, very blunted chopsticks, and Japanese have very shorter, very pointed chopsticks. And the Japanese eat short grain rice, and the Chinese eat long grain rice. So you look at that little grain that they're holding at the end of the chopsticks. It's another one called Japs and Jap, which address the idea that, if you're a person of color, there's not a day that you wake up that you don't realize you're a person of color. This was after I gave my collection to the Wing Luke Museum. They did an exhibition of my paintings on that subject, as well as a sampling of my collection. And this traveled to Michigan. And this was sort of the summary painting of that called Yellow Chair. It's a large painting, 5 by 6 feet. You can see me in the middle there, making my eyes slanted, my teeth butt, you know. And my wife and I. And this was just sort of an aside to everything. Every time I received my name misspelled on an envelope, I would cut it out and save it. You know, because there's this sort of general feeling like if your name is really complicated, who knows if it's going to be misspelled, you know, unless it's you, of course. So there's no two alike here, and this is a very, very big. However, now it's twice the big collection. So that, you know, this is another stereotype of sorts. And this is all true. These are all people I've been mistaken for because we all look alike, right? And included in here are 2 white guys and a Chinese woman. On the right column, second down, is the famous painter Hung Lu. Teaches at Mills College. She had a show at the Kemper Museum in Kansas City a few years ago, and I went to surprise her, and I got there before she did. And the door opened, and these 2 blue-haired ladies grabbed me by my arm and said, "Well, you must be Hung Lu." Performance, this was the next to last performance. This was a very large, hour and 20-minute extravaganza. But at one point, this person came out acting all goofy. It's about stereotypes. In the back was a Asian American girl learning how to tap dance. In a series of paintings called Stereotypes and Admonitions. And in it were 35 stories of racism that I had experienced myself. And this particular painting was done, or incident happened during the Iran hostage crisis. And I was out jogging and down this county road, and I saw this truck coming at me, which wasn't unusual until it pulled over to my side of the road and started slowing down. And I thought, oh, you know, an encounter. And sure as heck, as soon as he came next to me and stopped, there was one guy in the truck, and he flipped me the bird, and he screamed at me, "That's for your Ayatollah, you Chinaman." Okay, this is the last series, of which the paintings downstairs are part of the American knockoff. And these are, well, actually, the first portraits happened way back in 1990, way before I knew I'd be painting a whole series of self-portraits. And I did this when I was teaching at Carleton College for 1 semester. And I had experienced heart problems as well. And so I went there taking my blood pressure every day and teaching performance art and writing the script to my new performance piece. And I decided, because I liked this painting so much, that I was going to do, this was during the U.S. auto crisis. I decided I was going to allow Japan to take over this country, but they would take over 15 of my friends in Florence. And so I did a whole series of portraits, and each painting also told a story about that particular person. I'm not showing you any more of those, but on the heels of that was this series called Forever Foreigner, which has a lot to do with this series, American Knockoff series, in that, when you see Asian people, the presumption is that they're foreigners, and that just doesn't seem to go away. I mean, for my entire life, it's been like that. And it still happens, even to the extent that I one time gave a lecture, I won't say where, but after the lecture was over, you've heard most of it now. This woman came up to me and said, "But you never said what part of Japan you were from." And there's that sort of insistence look like that, you must be foreign, you know, or your language, your English is really good, you know. I like the one who come up and say, you know, I once met a person from Japan. Maybe you know her. So I did a series of paintings in 2005 called Wannabes, Gonnabes, Gonabes. And I put myself in these situations of, you know, typically Western costumes or typically Eastern costumes. And a painting sold by the McNay Museum in Texas called Forever Foreign, where I place myself in the context of Japanese nationals. And this is the same idea except in comic fashion. And this is a performance I did way back in 1989 that had to do with Japanese American sororities. Since it was written in the chapter that fraternity sororities have to be all white, the people of color started their own. And these, myself in these, again, you know, you can see from what I just got through saying about switching identities. And this is the whole thing about being mistaken for Chinese, you know. That's another thing. I mean, you know, a lot of these go back to my childhood that are still there. It's another version showing my Minidoka tattoo to show that I'm Japanese, not Chinese. That was sort of in response to the Chinese during the time we used to wear I'm Chinese buttons. Again, separating myself from Japanese nationals. This painting was meant to express a certain disappointment in you know, that American dream that we're expected to believe. Walt Disney certainly was not immune from making a lot of racist, creating a lot of racist stereotypes. I have a painting, I don't think it's in this group, nothing but ethnic stereotypes that were created by Disney. Oh, this is it. Yeah, all of these images come out of Walt Disney books. So that's me as a stereotype, you know, martial artist. Fighting World War II stereotypes. This is called Shimomura Crossing the Delaware. This was purchased by the National Portrait Gallery. Smithsonian. It's a big painting, it's 12 feet wide, and just was meant to pose the question, you know, what if George Washington was Japanese American? Can you imagine all the events that would have had to have been different in the world leading up to that? Or how different things might have been after this moment in history. These are the last two pieces I'm showing you now, and they're just public art pieces. Mural I did in Seattle. It's 12 by 36 feet. It's done on, it's fired on steel, so it's graffiti proof. It's in the loading platform of the underground tunnel system in Seattle, the downtown station. And this was a piece I did for light rail. And these objects were meant to symbolically raise the question on whether America should be a melting pot or a tossed salad. and haikus written by poets, 4 different ethnic backgrounds. This is in the most ethnically diverse neighborhood in Seattle, Martin King Parkway. And interesting, that ice cream bar, that yellow and white thing there, used to be a banana. And the Asian Americans thought that I was accusing them of being bananas. But, which yellow on the outside, white on the inside, right? But what I meant was it was a warning not to become a banana. If you come and melt into this country, don't give up your identity. Anyway, there was so much controversy over this piece. It's almost a lecture in itself. I believe that's the last one. Yeah. Thank you very much.